this is what you guys should pull up, the community ecology. You guys left, we were doing population ecology, which honestly is not the most thrilling part of ecology. Remember, it was how populations grow exponentially and logistically and limiting factors. Now we're switching to what I think is the more interesting part of ecology. I think you guys are going to like it better too. It's community ecology. So we're studying relationships, like who eats who, and also something called symbiosis. That's what this unit will be about. It's chapter 4.1. Chapter 4.2 and 4.3 in your book. So your first couple of slides to help us move relatively quickly. Some of your slides, like they don't have anything you need to write. I just want you to highlight important terms here. So again, the difference is now we're looking at interactions between different species. So before it was like all the lily pads or all the humans in the area or all the deer in the area. Now we're looking at how different species interact together. Okay, we have discussed biotic and abiotic, but I can't remember us really writing it down anywhere. So I wanted to make sure we had it here. What does the prefix bio mean? Life. Okay, so biotic factors are living factors. And then anytime I put A in front of something, what does it mean? Not. So abiotic is our non-living factors. And I don't mean something that has died. I mean something that was never alive. So temperature, water, rocks, okay, those things are abiotic. Things that have never been living. And I want you to put a star here. This seems silly, but a lot of times we think about plants as part of the landscape and we forget that they are living. So for example, I have this question that I ask you on the test, and it's which of the following is an example of an abiotic and biotic factor interacting? And the most chosen wrong answer is a caterpillar eating a leaf. Why is that incorrect? They're both biotic, but it's just easy to forget that plants are living. Okay, so plants are living. Please don't forget that. They're not just part of the landscape. These are just some examples of important biotic and abiotic factors. What's in red are more like what this unit is about. So competition, producer, consumer, living relationships. And then over here in the white and black, you've got important abiotic factors in any ecosystem. One thing I want to point out to you, in water, salinity is important, but I've discovered we don't always know what salinity means. You guys know what salinity means? It's almost got the word salt in it. Salinity is salt, okay, the amount of salt. So if you don't know that, write it out to the side because it could come up, and I want you to be familiar with what it means. Salinity is just salt concentration. So, for example, like the ocean, I think is 3.8% salt, between 3 and 4% salt. That can be important because that can determine what type of organisms can live there. Okay, so this is our first definition, and I don't think we actually defined it when we did populations. The definition of a species, okay, not for us, but for every other living thing on Earth, the goal is to not just survive, but reproduce so that you can pass on your DNA to the next generation and the next generation and the next generation. Think about it, like it's kind of how you get to live forever is by passing on your DNA. So for organisms, that's their goal to be successful. But in order to be successful, it's not enough that you reproduce. Okay, your offspring have to also be fertile. Okay, you have to be able to produce fertile offspring. Can you guys think of a farm animal that's infertile that's the result of crossing two different species? A mule is a donkey and a horse. Okay, so a donkey and a horse are closely enough related that they can interbreed, but the mule is sterile. So if you want to have more mules on your farm or whatever, you have to breed a donkey and a horse again. The mules themselves are sterile. And the reason why, we'll talk about this with meiosis, but one of them has 62 chromosomes and the other one has 64 chromosomes. And you get half your DNA from each parent. So the mule has 63 chromosomes. And it turns out that their body doesn't work so well trying to process that 63 because we pass an even number of chromosomes or I shouldn't say an even number, but one complete copy of chromosomes onto offspring. And so if you have 63 chromosomes, that's difficult to do because you can't split an odd number in half evenly. So the mule is sterile. Can you think of some other organisms like that? Liger, lion and a tiger, zonkey, zebra and a donkey, zorse, zebra and a horse. Like all those things are real, but they're relationships that humans have encouraged. Like in real nature, those organisms wouldn't come in contact with each other, so they wouldn't interbreed. Organisms go to great lengths, it seems silly, but great lengths to make sure that they don't interbreed with the wrong species, because then you're wasting energy that's not going to produce fertile offspring. So it's things, and we'll talk about this a little bit with evolution, like frogs calling at different times, or lightning bugs flashing at different frequencies, or being active in the day versus at night. All those behaviors are to keep them from mating with the wrong species, because you want to mate with the same species so that you can pass on your genes. Okay, so that's the definition of the species. This is a biological definition. There's a morphological definition and a bunch of other species concepts that we use in biology, but this is the one we'll use in this class. Okay, so organisms that can reproduce fertile offspring and live in the same area are a population. So for it to be a population, it has to be same species in the same location, the same time. Okay, because they're facing similar environmental challenges, they're interbreeding together. That's a population. A community is all the populations in an area, different species. Now, this is different from what humans call community, because humans are all one species. The community is like all the different species. So in this picture, you've got the ladybug, the aphid, the broom plant. All those together are the community. When I add the abiotic environment, so rain, okay, soil quality, temperature, when I add those factors in, then I call it an ecosystem. The living and the non-living parts are an ecosystem. And if I wanted to zoom out even more, we also have biomes and biosphere. These are the relationships that we're going to study. This is what we're going to work on today and Wednesday. Predator-prey, herbivory, and symbiosis. I really want you guys to know the difference between herbivory and predator-prey. Okay, and it might sound funny, but like every year somebody's like, a squirrel is a predator to the oak tree. Okay, and that is not correct. A predator hunts other animals. And the reason it's important is because there's big differences between predator, prey, and herbivory. For example, if a giraffe is feeding on a tree and it's eating the tree leaves, is the tree going to die? No, it's sustaining some damage, right? Some harm from the herbivory. But it's going to be able to regenerate that unless it's just really been overgrazed. But like if you're a prey, in order for the predator to be fed, what's going to happen to you? You're going to die. You're going to be eaten. It's kind of morbid, but that's the difference. There's a balance between herbivores and plants that doesn't, it's not exactly the same as your relationship between predator and prey. Samuel Lake? No, but it does kind of have some similarities, because what you're thinking about is like a parasite doesn't immediately kill its host, right? Plants and herbivores don't have that same type of close relationship. And we'll talk about that when we talk about symbiosis. But you're right, there's some similarities. Like a parasite doesn't always immediately kill, it does not ever immediately kill its host, because in doing so, it usually kills itself. But we'll talk about all of these. This we'll talk about Wednesday. Okay, the reason relationships are important is because they create ecosystem stability. And I've been so interested all day long in how you guys are defining stability. Like if you hear that a person is stable or that a relationship is stable, like what does that usually mean? It's good. What, Leah? Yeah, it's not like, it's funny because almost every period somebody has said like it means you're good or it's good, like everything's good. And that is what stable means. Like there's no interruptions. It's able to function. It's able to endure. Stability is the ability of an ecosystem to endure, meaning it can withstand small changes. It's not changing over time. It's not being harmed over time to help the ecosystem. Stability and health are kind of the same thing. They're related. If an ecosystem is stable, it tends to be really healthy. Okay, and I've got a video to show you guys an example of that. In Yellowstone National Park, they reintroduced wolves, and it changed the stability of that relationship. So I want you guys to watch it. It's just like 4 minutes long, and then we'll talk about it.
One of the most exciting scientific findings of the past half-century has been the discovery of widespread trophic cascades. A trophic cascade is an ecological process which starts at the top of the food chain and tumbles all the way down to the bottom. And the classic example is what happened in the Yellowstone National Park in the United States when wolves were reintroduced in 1995. Now, we all know that wolves kill various species of animals, but perhaps we're slightly less aware that they give life to many others. Before the wolves turned up, they'd been absent for 70 years. That the numbers of deer, because there was nothing to hunt them, had built up and built up in the Yellowstone Park, and despite efforts by humans to control them, they'd managed to reduce much of the vegetation there to almost nothing. They'd just grazed it away. But as soon as the wolves arrived, even though they were few in number, they started to have the most remarkable effects. First, of course, they killed some of the deer, but that wasn't the major thing. Much more significantly, they radically changed the behavior of the deer. The deer started avoiding certain parts of the park, the places where they could be trapped most easily, particularly the valleys and the gorges. And immediately those places started to regenerate. In some areas, the height of the trees quintupled in just 6 years. Bare valley sides quickly became forests of aspen and willow and cottonwood. And as soon as that happened, the birds started moving in. The number of songbirds and migratory birds started to increase greatly. The number of beavers started to increase because beavers like to eat the trees. And beavers, like wolves, are ecosystem engineers. They create niches for other species. And the dams they built in the rivers provided habitats for otters and muskrats and ducks and fish and reptiles and amphibians. The wolves killed coyotes, and as a result of that, the number of rabbits and mice began to rise, which meant more hawks, more weasels, more foxes, more badgers. Ravens and bald eagles came down to feed on the carrion that the wolves had left. Bears fed on it too, and their population began to rise as well, partly also because there were more berries growing on the regenerating shrubs. And the bears reinforced the impact of the wolves by killing some of the calves of the deer. But here's where it gets really interesting. The wolves changed the behavior of the rivers. They began to meander less. There was less erosion. The channels narrowed, more pools formed, more riffle sections, all of which were great for wildlife habitats. The rivers changed in response to the wolves. And the reason was that the regenerating forests stabilized the banks so that they collapsed less often, so that the rivers became more fixed in their course. Similarly, by driving the deer out of some places and the vegetation recovering on the valley sides, there was less soil erosion because the vegetation stabilized that as well. So the wolves, small in number, transformed not just the ecosystem of the Yellowstone National Park, this huge area of land, but also its physical geography.
Okay, so what was the problem that the park staff were trying to address? Yeah, overpopulation of the deer, and the result of that was overgrazing, so it was really affecting the plant populations, but a lot of things happened that they weren't expecting when they introduced the deer. Okay, so obviously the vegetation came back, but what else happened? Yeah, like the water changed and the deer began behaving differently, so they would stay away from certain areas where they could get cornered. So like a ravine or valley is like a place that's at a lower elevation, so also some of your rivers were in that situation, and deers would avoid that area because it was a good place to get ambushed. And so that allowed some hardier species, some perennial species, in other words, species that are alive for more than 1 year. It allowed them to grow, and that allowed them to have deep roots, and it also stabilized the banks and made the flows of the rivers more stable. And all of that happened really just from reintroducing the wolves. Why do you guys think the wolves were gone in the first place? It was humans. The role of top predators, which might kind of seem obvious to you guys now, like really wasn't well known for a long time. So 70 years ago, they really decimated, and starting before that, but we decimated the wolf population, kind of seeing them as a pest species or a species that wasn't safe for people to be around. So they got rid of the wolves, and it had all these unaffected consequences that really took about 70 years for us to catch on to and realize. Like until there were real changes in the landscape, we didn't know, we didn't see it. So that's an example of ecosystem stability and a relationship that's really important. The relationship between the deer and the wolves are important because it allows the plants to grow. Keeping herbivores in check is something that's really important for a healthy ecosystem, because plants are food, but plants are also, as you saw, habitat. So if the plants are being overgrazed, it's also going to affect habitat for other organisms. Okay, our definition for predator-prey, 2 key words here that makes it different from plant relationships. Okay, one organism captures and kills another organism. In order for the predator to be fed, the prey has to die. Okay, and it has to be to consumers. Or if you would rather write animals there, that's fine too. Okay, and one of the most important things for you guys to know about predator and prey is that they keep each other in balance. And you saw that in the video, but we've also had researchers gather data to support that. So this is a really cool study that happened in Canada, and you can see it started like in the 1840s. A scientist had an idea that the lynx and the hare, that predator and prey, had this controlling effect on each other. Okay, but it's like 1840, so we can't go out and tag organisms or track them or use a GPS or any of the technology that we have today. So what they did is they went into the markets, because the fur trade was really big. Okay, they went into the markets, and they also talked to like the hunters that were harvesting the pelts, the fur of these animals, and they would count the animal skins to track the population. So they were taking advantage of something that people were doing anyways. People were already trapping and killing these organisms for their coats. And so the researchers went in and they started counting and estimating the population from there. And what you have is it's more rough around the edges because it's real live data. But you can see like when the rabbit population increases right here, what happens to the lynx population? It increases too, but there's a little bit of a lag because it takes time for them to catch up. And then when the rabbits decrease, the lynx also decrease. Now you do have this kind of weird dip right here. What's happening right there is in that year there was a really bad, I think it was a parasite, but a disease of the rabbits that caused the population to be drastically lower that year. So that's what this weird little dip is right after 1850. But you can see it continues on like that. And if I were to smooth it out, okay, it would look like this. And I left this one with notes on it for you. So when the prey increase, when there's a high number of prey, the predators increase too. And then because the predators are high, the prey decreases. And it just continues on and on like that. And that's part of the oscillating that you saw at the top of the logistic graph. That's what causes it, one of the things that causes it. Okay, what we're going to do here, you guys have this that says predator tactics, and then on the next you have prey tactics. And what I want you guys to do is just write down a couple of the tactics that I'm about to mention to you. Write down some of the ones you like. I have this on a different slide. But these are just strategies that predator and prey use to either catch each other or escape. Okay, so the first one that can be used by predator and prey is camouflage. So you see your polar bear blending in there, and you also have a stick bug. And camouflage can work both ways because most animals, think about it, we're lucky about our location in the food chain, but most organisms are somewhere in the middle. So camouflage can help you hunt your prey, but it can also help you escape your predator. And like that little stick bug, it has a camouflage look, but it also has camouflage behavior. Like when the wind is blowing, it'll kind of sway with the trees so that it doesn't look like a stick standing still, because then that makes it obvious that it's really a bug. So it'll sway in addition to being camouflage. Another tactic is the hide and wait tactic. Patience is a virtue. Okay, you've probably seen your house cat do this. It's a behavior that's inherited from larger cats. They'll wait and then they'll pounce on their prey. Owls do that as well. They'll wait high up in a tree and then they'll come out. Okay, and then death by poisoning. There's poisonous organisms and there's venomous organisms. Snakes are not poisonous, they're venomous. And the reason why is because they use their poison to attack. Their venom is in their fangs, or with the scorpion, it's in the tail, and they'll use that to paralyze or neutralize their prey so that they can eat it. Okay, that's different from being poisonous. We'll talk about that in a minute. So venom is like, I have venom and I use it on you to paralyze my prey. Poison is, I'm poisonous and if you eat me, you will die. That's the difference between the two. So predators use venom. And then having traps, like a spider web is a trap. And a lot of your predators are just really big, really smart, and really fast in a lot of cases. The killer whale is a cool example because it'll actually beach itself intentionally to catch seals. Like the seals are hanging out on the shore and they think they're safe. And then all of a sudden the killer whale will just come all the way up and snatch the seal and then shimmy himself back into the ocean. And that's a behavior that he's been able to learn because he's very intelligent. Okay, your prey can do a lot of the same things. They can camouflage. The rabbit or the hare is a really cool example because they have something called seasonal change in color due to gene expression. So part of the year, their genes produce brown hair. And then when the temperature drops, their genes lose that ability to produce brown. And they make white fur, which helps them camouflage better in the winter. So camouflage for prey. A lot of prey are just extremely fast, so they can flee. And then poison, again, not venom, but poison is if an organism eats you, they will die. But it doesn't do you any good to be poisonous if the predator doesn't know it until they've already eaten you. So how do they address that? They're brightly colored. You've got your poison dart frog there, and then in the left-hand corner, you've got your golden newt. And that is one of the most poisonous animals in the world. And we actually have it here in the United States. And I'll show you guys a video later in the year more about them. They're really interesting. And there's a professor that just studies golden newts. And the way he got interested in them was he was reading in the paper. There were these campers, and they just mysteriously died. Like when people found them at their campsite, there was no evidence as to why they had passed away. And when they started looking around, they opened up their coffee pot, and a newt had crawled into the coffee pot, and they had boiled it and drank it, and they accidentally poisoned themselves from the newt. So that's how poisonous they are. I guess the newt was like trying to find moisture, and so it got into the coffee pot, and they never knew that it was there until they drank the poison. I guess the coffee taste kind of covered it up. Okay, and then armor, like the eastern box turtle and the porcupine. Eastern box turtles, I feel like we kind of take them for granted because they live in our area, but they can completely close their shell. And they're really the only turtle that can do that. They have that kind of hinge, and they can shut themselves all the way in, and most predators can't get to them that way. Raccoons can, but a lot of other organisms can't. And what raccoons do is they take them to a rock, and they beat the turtle on the rock and break its shell. Yeah, it's terrible. Raccoons are really smart. And the reason I know that is because I have a professor who tracked turtles, and sometimes we would go out and help her track her turtles. And have these really expensive trackers on them, and sometimes they would just blink out. And usually what had caused it was the raccoons. Like, we'd go try to find its last location, and we would find the tracker and the poor little turtle shell like up against a rock because the raccoon had found a way to get into it. And then faking dead. You guys have probably seen possums do this. Predators, real predators, don't like to eat dead meat. Like, scavengers will eat it, but predators tend to avoid doing that. So possums will play dead, and then this is a snake that plays dead. It's called the hognose snake. You guys see his little tongue hanging out of his mouth? Okay, so he'll flip over on his belly. And then if you're not poisonous, why not mimic somebody who is? That's a good strategy too. Like, in the animal world, black and yellow is universally dangerous, venomous. So this is a hornet or yellow jacket, but this is a fruit fly. This is zoomed really in, really magnified. This is a fruit fly, and this is a caterpillar. And then here you have two snakes. This is the coral snake. It's deadly venomous. Red touch yellow, kill a fellow. This is the king snake that mimics it. Red touch black, won't harm Jack. So the snake is a predator, but it's also a prey because it's pretty small. So it's mimicking that coral snake to avoid being eaten. And then disguise. This is one of my favorites, the eye spots. This moth has them on the outside wings, but most moths, they're underneath. And what they'll do is they'll perch on the trees during the day, and they'll hide those eye spots. And when they feel a bird coming, they'll open their top wings to reveal those eyes. And to the bird, it looks like an owl, like opening its eyes. And it'll startle the bird enough for the moth to get away. And then here, this one's funny too. This is a caterpillar, and this is actually the rear of the caterpillar. It has like a snake head, a fake snake head, to help deter predators. But the reason it's on the rear and not on the face is because if you take a hit to the rear end, you can probably escape, but a peck to the head can be deadly. So there's frogs that have a face on their bottoms, and there's this caterpillar, and there's several things that mimic in that way. And then just strengthen numbers. If there's more of you, you're less likely to get eaten. And then we've just got two more things. Our definition of herbivory. Herbivory is the consumption of what? Yeah, plants by consumers or by animals. If you want to put animals there, that's fine. And when you eat a plant, you are called an herbivore. So herbivores have these adaptations that allow them to eat plants. And plants in turn have defense mechanisms like dangerous chemicals. Did I short you a page? Okay, I'll print it for you. Daniel, same thing? Or you've got it? Okay. I maybe left it over here. I'll get it for you. This is the last page we're going to do today. So animal adaptations, I feel like we know. But one thing that's really cool that you guys are probably less familiar with is plant adaptations to avoid herbivory. Have you guys ever eaten too much pineapple and it's made your mouth feel like kind of sore and prickly? That is a compound called bromelain. And it's a chemical that's toxic to herbivores. It's supposed to deter herbivores. Or, you know, the like really distinct taste that cabbage and broccoli and Brussels sprouts all have. That is what we call a phytotoxin. It's a chemical that kills most caterpillars that they have to avoid them being fed on. So plants have all these cool adaptations that we just don't, we overlook them because they're stationary organisms. But I have a video for it. But right now, for whatever reason, YouTube is blocked. So I'll have to show you that later. And then last thing, and you don't have anything to write here, it's just a definition. When we talk about predator-prey and herbivores and their plants, it's an example of coevolution, like species evolving in response to each other. And a lot of times we call it an arms race. Have you guys talked about the arms race in history class? Between who and who? Yeah. America and Russia, like the arms race, like the race to arm ourselves for nuclear warfare is where that name comes from. And in nature, we call it the evolutionary arms race because over time, organisms evolve to either beat their predator or to overcome their prey. So your little newt is actually an example of that. The reason the golden newt is so poisonous is because the black snake can eat it. It's immune to it. So over time, the only newts that have survived are the ones that have been poisonous enough to escape the black snakes because they can actually spit the newt out. If they taste like too much poison, they'll spit it out. And then the only black snakes that have survived are the ones that are immune to the poison. So over time, the golden newt has gotten more and more poisonous, and the snake has gotten more and more immune. And we call that an arms race. Another thing is like speed. Like some of the prey that are so fast, the reason they're so fast is because the predator and the prey have been evolving to become faster and faster because it's the faster ones that survive. And that's what coevolution is. I've got a quick video about bats and moths. I'm going to show you part of it.
And they filled them. But around 50 million years ago, one of the greatest arms races of all time began. The ancestors of bats were small mammals which pounced on insects. Flying was a ticket to the vast larder of moth that filled the night skies. But how could they find small, fast-moving prey without sunlight? Bats use their ears. They emit high-intensity pulses of sound. Then listen for echoes bouncing back. Their brains process these reflections into a three-dimensional image, an accurate picture of their dark world. Slowing down picture and sound gives a clearer view of each encounter. This sonar is a brilliant weapon for finding prey in the dark, making bats successful around the world. Bats, though, didn't have it all their own way for long. Moths evolved a counterweapon, a simple ear that could detect approaching sonar. An early warning allows the moth to swerve away. As bats approach, they increase their calling rate. For moths, an emergency cue to plummet, though not always to safety. Many bats are superb fishermen. It's even possible that hunting over water has become a deliberate ploy to snare diving moths.
Okay, so bats are evolved from organisms that live during the day. What method did they develop to be able to hunt at night? Yeah, echolocation. And you guys maybe have heard that at night, like that chirping, and maybe you didn't know what it was. It's bats. And then in turn, what have moths developed to better escape them? Ears that help them pick up on that. And then this continues. There's more things that have happened. Like there's some bats that have developed really big ears to be able to hear the moths better so that they can turn their echolocation off as they approach the moth and then use their ears. And the moths have developed some additional adaptations as well. Like some of them have gone towards daytime, like they live in the day now. And it just kind of goes on and on like that. There's constantly emerging adaptations. Guys, I'm going to summarize the top part for you so we can get started. This is not your homework. This is not homework. I want you to do it in class. You guys are good about doing your homework, but some of my other classes aren't, and I want us to do this together. So, summary on this, there was an island. You guys can go back and read the whole thing later. there's an island with deer, kind of like Yellowstone. They were overgrazing. It was too far to allow hunters to come in. So they brought in wolves, and then they tracked the population of the wolf and the deer for 10 years to see what effect it had. So you've got your wolf, deer, offspring, deaths, and then the net population change you'll have to calculate. But before we do that, I wanted to look at the graph with you because that's the part of this that's really different. How is this graph different from what you're used to looking at? Yeah, it has two axes, and the reason why is because it's adjusting for the fact that your wolf population is much smaller than your deer population. Your wolf population is in the tens, and the deer is in the thousands. So when you're looking to plot your wolf, you've got to look over here to your wolf axis. So when you're doing the wolf, you're going to look on the right, and when you're doing the deer, you're going to look at the left. So look and tell me, what's the population of deer in 1971? Not deer, wolves. Wolves in 1971. 10. So look, I'm going to go to 1971, and I'm going to go to 10. All right, and I'm going to drop my line or my dot right there. And then what do I need to do for 1972? 12. And I'm going to plot all my points and connect them before I try to do my deer. Because if you try to do deer and wolf at the same time, you're going to mess up. So do all your wolf points and connect them, and then switch to your deer. I want you to try to plot your wolf before you leave today.